Good afternoon. I'm Bob Mascali, Chair of the Falmouth Select Board, and I'm here at the FCTV studios. We're doing this live, and we appreciate the FCTV making this time and the studio available for us to be able to let the residents know what has been happening at the Select Board. And this particular show is going to focus on our recent town meeting. And in that regard, I'm honored to have as our guest State Representative David Vieira, who in his spare time is also our town moderator. For how many years, David?
27 now.
27 years. You had hair when you started.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, you did, okay. And
hi, everybody. Mike Renshaw, your town manager.
Okay, well, thank you both. Interesting town meeting. I mean, for both Mike and I, it was the first time that we were at a two-evening or two-night town meeting. Is that unusual, David, over the past 27 years?
No, actually, 2 nights or 3 nights for the spring annual was sort of a sweet spot for many years. I started off with many one nights, and then we went back to some one nights. But it depends on what's on the warrant, the dynamic of the members, and as members change, you can really see how the debate changes, right? And so we have had in the last probably 4 or 5 years the most changeover of town meeting members that I've seen, and so the dynamic changes with that as well.
So I think we had, 194, I think was the quorum count on night one, and a little less on night two. That's a lower turnout than has been in the past?
Usually we're around 200, and then folks come and go.
And they don't get registered for the
yeah,
quorum.
they get there later, so they sign in, but they're not part of the quorum count. Yeah, so at the first night we were maybe a dozen folks lower than average.
David, I know you're a student of history, and especially Falmouth history. Why don't you give our viewers a little bit of the history of town meeting and how we came to have representative town meeting, which is a little unusual for many of the towns out here on the Cape.
Yeah, actually we're the only town on Cape Cod that has a representative town meeting. The town of Barnstable tried it in the 80s for a decade, and then they went to the town council form of government. But the other towns have the open town meeting, and the open town meeting is where any registered voter can go to town meeting and make motions and vote. And what happened in Falmouth back in the 1930s, as refrigeration was coming out and condensing units, Sam Cahoon owned a fish market and an ice works down in Woods Hole. They used to harvest the ice from the ice pond up by Beebe's Woods, and they would store it in hay, and then they would deliver it throughout the summer to those that could afford to have ice brought to the house. And he figured, I can slow down the ice melting if I refrigerate these warehouses. And so he needed a zoning change to be able to do that on his property. And so he brought all of his employees to town meeting. He bought, I told they bought train tickets for folks to take the train from one village to the other, and other folks got picked up by the trucks that he used to move the ice, and they packed the house at town meeting. And his zoning passed, and they left. And we didn't have a quorum to continue the business of the town. And so folks were like, wait a second, should the person with the biggest trucks and the biggest payroll be running the entire town? And so we had 2 referendums. The first one failed, the second one passed, to petition the state legislature to parcel off the town into precincts and to elect the members to town meeting. Now, this was innovative at the time because representative town meeting was not a standard form of government in the Commonwealth. And so we have a 1935 special act to allow the town to do that, and then we convened our representative town meeting in 1936.
And we have 2 town meetings. How does that stack up against the other towns on the Cape?
Yeah, so most towns have an annual town meeting in the spring, and then depending on what they might need to do in the fall, they will call for a special town meeting. When Falmouth went to the Home Rule Charter, we put in there 2 annual town meetings, one in the spring and one in the fall. And the difference really is there's a series of state statutes around how to call, as the select board, how to call an annual town meeting and how many signatures you need to be able to get a warrant article on the warrant. And so we have the 2 annual town meetings, which are lower thresholds. And then occasionally we do embed a special because something comes up late after the warrant's closed, and we'll do a special. And then once in a while, if the budget goes sideways in the summer, we have a special town meeting to balance the budget.
So, I mean, even though we have 2 meetings, we call them annual meetings. Some people have questioned the terminology, but that's because that's the way the charter reads.
State statute.
State statute
Yeah.
reads that they have to, they are annual meetings.
Yes.
So
There's a legal definition
to be
behind it.
specific,
yeah,
they'd
rather
be
than
biannual
descriptive.
meetings, right?
Yeah.
Or semi-annual meetings.
Yeah.
One of the other, I'm not sure which one. And then the other thing, and then we'll get into the discussion of the articles, but I never really appreciated until I came on the select board how much work is involved in getting ready for town meeting, on your part in particular, as far as talking to committees and how they want to present their articles or petitioners. Tell us a little bit about how involved that is, David, and how involved you get in that.
So it really starts when the select board opens up the warrant for articles, right? Folks will start to call me and ask me, I'm thinking about doing this, whether it's a petitioner, occasionally it's a committee or a board in the town, and they'll ask a little bit about, what type of wording should we use, and I'll work with council, and some cases refer them to council, other times it's easy enough for me to just give them the advice directly. So helping craft that, then they go and they get their either signatures, or if it's a board or committee under the select board, they come to you and ask you if you would endorse it and put it on their behalf. So that's the first round. Then the second round is, as people are diving into the articles and getting ready to go to town meeting, there's a difference between a motion and an article. And so we start working with individuals to craft the appropriate motions. The motion is the call to action that a town meeting member makes on the floor of town meeting, or the finance chair or the select board chair. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the same as what's printed in the article, but it has to be within the scope of the article. So we have a thing called the four corners. And we make sure that if we have an article that says that we're going to buy a fire truck for a certain amount of money, and we come to town meeting, we might find out that there's a different fire truck, or it's a different amount of money that we originally thought it might be. So we have some leeway in there, but when we get to the town meeting, if somebody decides, I'll give you a true case. You buy a fire truck and it doesn't fit in one of your fire stations. Not that that's ever happened in Falmouth,
I know where he's going with that.
We can, at that town meeting, take a motion to rebuild the fire station, to add on to the fire station, right? That's beyond the scope. We told the voters we're coming to talk about buying a truck, and it might be a different type of truck, but a truck, not a building, right? Not a multi-million-dollar building. And so that would have to come up at a future town meeting. So a lot of the work goes there. And then, as you all know from the meetings that we've had, we do the briefing. The town manager coordinates with folks at town hall, the town clerk's office, the council, and the finance committee, and we get together to really go through article by article before town meeting, figure out, did anything change? What are we hearing from the precinct meetings? So it gives us an idea. Maybe some petitioners have some questions, and then I can call them and say, hey, there's an issue here. Let me see if I can help you, so you can be prepared at town meeting. And then it's time to roll.
And even the concept of precinct meetings is somewhat unusual. And how did that happen in Falmouth?
Yeah.
That whole process of precinct meetings. I understand that was a change some years ago.
Yeah, so the precinct meetings do not exist anywhere in the town bylaws or the charter. There's no formal precinct organization. But we used to have, years ago at the Morse Pond School, we used to have a joint precinct meeting. And precincts could go and get classrooms if they wanted beforehand, and then they would come together and they would be sort of a review of the warrant. It wasn't working really well, and it was becoming more of people would come and want to start debating the articles, like a pre-town meeting, right? And so the League of Women Voters, Mike Palmer, when he was early in his career as the town clerk, myself, I believe Carrie Murphy, was on the select board at the time. We had a couple of meetings at town hall and talked about how could we maybe better prepare town meeting members for town meeting. And we said, well, let's try this. Let's call all of the town meeting members together and ask them to elect a captain, a vice captain, and a secretary, and pick a date within 2 weeks of town meeting, or right before town meeting, but after everyone has the warrant booklet in hand with the recommendations, and see if they'll schedule meetings within their precincts, in their portions of town. We had a model up in Precinct 5 in North Falmouth, the 5-6. They were meeting jointly, and they just always met because they have an association, a village association, and that sort of called the town meeting members together before town meeting. So that was kind of like a model for us. So we gave it a try, and it's worked. We've been doing it now for, I don't know how many years, but it's going to be close to 20.
It's a really valuable
helpful.
process.
It's helpful for me, I'll tell you,
Definitely.
to go to the precinct meetings and hear what people are thinking about. And historically, the spring meeting in April deals with the budget from an operating budget point of view, and the November fall meeting, or soon to be October fall meeting, deals more on the capital side, and sometimes the lines blur a little bit with respect to operating and capital, but we were able to approve, and Mike, wonderful job on presenting the budget. Very little discussion about it. Your presentation was spot on. You want to talk a little bit about the budget?
I'd love to. So it was this budget year was probably, of the three that I've done, this was probably the most challenging. We had a little over a $2 million gap that we had to close, and as I mentioned Monday night, we struck about a little over $2 million in departmental requests that we just could not fund. As you all know, budgets are about difficult choices, and we made the decision not to fund over $2 million in departmental requests. Those were primarily new personnel that were requested. We just didn't feel at this point, based upon some forecasting that we've done, and I'll talk about that in a moment, that it was appropriate to begin adding additional staff. So the budget, just short of $184 million total operating budget, was about a 5.7% increase, a little over $9 million increase from last year's spending. A lot of that, as I mentioned on Monday, is being driven by costs that we can't unfortunately control. A lot of healthcare, everybody knows healthcare costs across the country are increasing. We're limited, as everybody knows, to a 2.5% property tax increase, that levy cap. So one of the issues going forward is how we attempt to constrain the spending. As I mentioned Monday night, it's not sustainable to spend at a 5.5 to 5.7% increase each year
without increasing your revenues by a similar amount.
So and that is not rocket science math. So we have to figure out a way to become a little bit more sharpen our pencils and become focused on how we either reduce cost, the expense side of the equation, or look to increase revenues in some other way through either fees or some other way. But it's
this budget was balanced.
It was balanced, and in some important additions, and I mentioned this, and again, we've tried to, in the 3 years I've been here, tie both the operating budget, which we discussed this town meeting, and the capital budget to the Select Board strategic plan. So it always does have a strategic focus. And as I mentioned Monday, the positions that were added were public safety, a couple of them, and communications. That was the result of a study that was done last year. And we're just implementing the recommendations as part of that consultant study. The workload of our 911 dispatch center has increased at a rapid pace, and it was important to add those positions. And so we were strategic in terms of the positions that we added. But again, going forward, as I mentioned Monday night, FY28, our next operating budget, it's going to require some really crucial conversations between staff, myself, and then ultimately Select Board and Town Meeting as far as the direction that we're going to go. Because again, that gap, as I presented on Monday night, is increasing just as costs continue to escalate.
Well, thanks to your lead and member Colin Reed's lead, we're going to be addressing that at an upcoming Select Board meeting, April 27th.
We're going to
start that discussion, and it's a discussion that's going to be difficult and go on for a period of time, but I'm confident we'll get it right. So
and so am I. And we're not in a unique position. I want the viewers to know. I mean, talking to my colleagues, other town managers on Cape and off, the operating overrides were definitely a trend, right? Yeah. It was unusual for us to be in a position to be able, and we had to, as Peter Johnson Stout, the assistant town manager, and I say, we had to pull some levers and make some things, change some things up, utilizing some additional excess levy capacity, and to make it work. But we are not unique, and going forward, I think a lot of municipalities are going to be in the same position.
Yeah, actually, we just had in Boston a briefing by the Mass Municipal Association relative to some studies they've done around the municipal revenues and where the budgets are, and there are a lot of municipalities this year that are asking for general overrides because they're not able to either make the tough decisions, or they're smaller towns where there is not a lot to cut, and these cost drivers are happening, and so they're looking for the revenue piece of it. But we're actually in a stronger position than many of the towns that they presented to us last week.
Yeah,
and that's
we have-
because of a long-term commitment of doing things like moving our capital from the spring to the fall.
Right.
So now we can adjust the capital budget, right? Because we are waiting to see what the revenues are. We get a more true actual. We know what the burn rates are in the budget line items. When we used to do a lot of the capital and the operating budget in the spring, July 1st, starts the new fiscal year, you're projecting what's going to happen, and then if that doesn't start to pan itself out, or revenues go in a different direction, now you're stuck with having to come back to town meeting and start making these cuts of things that you've authorized. So I like the way Falmouth does it, that we get a clearer picture, we start to see some actuals, and then we come back in and make the right decisions in the fall.
We have a really strong bond rating. The bond rating is very good, very strong.
We
so
do.
we're paying
We do.
less interest than other communities might be. So, and that's because of the fiscal stability that the town has had all these many years. So, housing, of course, was a big issue. There were two items that were on the warrant that dealt with housing in one way or another. The first is there was a state statute. Appreciate the state legislature for passing the statute, which allows for a annual tax exemption of up to 100% of the tax value of the tax for a home, if that homeowner is willing to rent year-round to a family with an AMI of up to $200,000 a year. So attempting to find that missing middle, as everyone likes to refer to it. So as I said at town meeting, this is another tool in the toolbox of trying to allow us to get a handle on the housing issue, and that I think most people saw that it was an inexpensive way of providing for some year-round housing, as opposed to the more traditional way of building from scratch, clear cutting, having to make a parcel ready for development, as opposed to short money, really.
Absolutely.
To get those houses
more cost effective, like you said, Bob, and also brings those units to market faster, right? Because they're existing, right? We just have to go through that process. So it's beneficial to the environment because we're not clear cutting a bunch of trees, and it brings those units to market at a more reasonable cost.
And some people were concerned about what the impact would be on tax revenues. As was pointed out, it's not a revenue neutral situation, as this residential real estate tax exemption. We've implemented already is how that's going to play out. That should be revenue neutral. This is not revenue neutral, but again, it's a 50. We can manage it. We can say how many we're going to allow in any year, and whether it's going to be a 50% exemption or 100% exemption, or how we're going to set the floor for the AMI. So a lot that depends upon the select board. I certainly appreciated the vote of confidence that I think town meeting gave to the select board to be able to manage this, this new tool in our toolbox. And then jumping on a little bit down what we had said we were going to talk about, but kind of flows the seasonal community designation. And again, thanks to the state legislature for understanding that seasonal communities, and for the most part, the Cape Cod, but also western
Berkshires,
part of the state, that there are certain challenges that they have because of their seasonal nature that Boston and the heartland of the Commonwealth don't necessarily have. So this will require, it starts a 2-year clock.
Correct.
During which there are going to be, I anticipate community forums to discuss this. The planning board will be discussing it because they're the entity charged with changing the zoning, and there are changes that are required if we're going to reap the benefits of the seasonal community designation. So, but at least the discussion has been started. There was some concern that let's wait before we start that discussion, but I think town meeting was pretty overwhelmingly in support of let's get it started, let's see where it goes, and we'll take it from there. It's possible that that the zoning changes won't be palatable to the community, in which event we won't be able to get the benefits.
But this opens the door and allows those discussions and the dialogue to occur. So
yeah, that's the key, because these all have to come back to town meeting to be approved.
And then ultimately to town meeting.
Yeah,
exactly.
so this was the opportunity to start that conversation, start the clock officially, and then as we go through the process, each of those zoning changes will go through the planning board process, the public hearing process, and then town meeting for approval. So yeah, I think it was definitely a necessary step. I know some folks wanted it to wait. And I kept thinking, what are we waiting for? These things are going to come back for the decisions later, right? But I think town meeting made a good decision.
There's a lot of elements of it that I'm excited about, but in particular, the element concerning the local municipal workforce housing. That again, that attainable housing for employees of the town.
Huge.
I was going to, say something from up on the stage, because I don't think that was pushed enough. That the real, as I see it, and I agree with you, Mike, the real benefit for this town is our ability to give preference to public employees, and whether it's state, county, teachers, people who are adding to the public interest of the town are going to be able to have some benefit from it. And I think that's huge, because we're not allowed to do that under housing discrimination, anti-discrimination, fair
violates
housing
fair
laws.
housing law, and the lawyers in the administration were able to craft a law that they believe is strong enough to allow this exemption. If it's voted on, locally, you decide to accept this provision, and then to be able to make those preferences available. So.
I wanted to start, and I missed it, but I just wanted to start by saying that at the start of town meeting, one of the town meeting members, and rightly so, got up and wanted to acknowledge Michael Palmer's 22 years. I thought that was a wonderful, wonderful gesture, and town meeting, everyone stood twice and gave Michael a standing ovation for his service as town clerk for 22 years.
Yeah.
And thanks again to your pushing the charter change that we have sent to the state legislature on a home rule petition to be able to change the form from a elected town clerk to an appointed town clerk. So thank you for your efforts in that regard as well.
Yeah, and it's a team effort. Right now, as you know, we're working in the House process, and so Representative Thomas Moakley, the new state rep that shares Falmouth with me, he's been working side by side with me, and then once we get that final engrossment in the House, then Senator Fernandez will pick up the ball on the Senate side. Yeah,
it's wonderful. Good team. We have a wonderful team in the state delegation.
Yes,
we really do.
And Thomas, I love to tell this story. When Thomas was 12 years old, I was his citizenship counselor in the Boy Scouts.
Well, you
and
did
so
a good job.
I've known Thomas. I take all the credit. And he's doing a great job in Boston. He's really, he's a quick study on the things he doesn't know, and he's always willing to reach out to whoever can assist him in learning the ropes up there. And so I'm very happy to see him as my colleague now.
Yeah, wonderful. I wanted to talk a little bit about the Lawrence School, and we had a presentation from Paul Dart on behalf of the school. But Mike, you want to talk a little bit about that process and where we are and why we needed to authorize this $2 million for the feasibility study?
Sure. So as Paul mentioned during town meeting, this is a very important step in the Massachusetts School Building Authority process. In order to be eligible for a grant of, I believe Paul mentioned, up to 38.5%.
38.5%.
We have to follow these steps, and one of those is to engage the services of an OPM, owner's project manager, and an architect engineer, similar to how we've done other large capital building projects. This is no exception to that. And looking at the feasibility and the costs associated with both the renovation and on the other side of it, a demolition and rebuild, and what the cost benefits would be. I think I've only been here for 3 years, but I can sense the sentiment for the historic importance and value of that building. So it'll be interesting. But that's the process that the MSBA
So this is the first step.
requires. It is. And then parallel with that, this select board working with the school committee is also selecting members to serve on that school building committee.
We will finalize those members this coming
Monday.
This coming Monday, April 13th.
April 13th, correct. So pleased that was approved. I know there's a lot of robust discussion and dialogue about where that $2 million, the purpose of it. But that is exactly that. It's to hire the architect, engineer, and the OPM to get us kind of going down that path of identifying the best, most cost-effective way to proceed.
And it was interesting to hear a couple of the sentimental comments from people who actually graduated
From
from
high school.
1962.
school and feel,
Both of my
feel
parents
very,
graduated from Lawrence.
feel very committed to it.
It's interesting, but we were talking about other things that the moderator has to do other than the town meeting itself. The statute recently changed for the school building authority. School building committees were appointed by the town moderators. And so I actually appointed the committees for the previous Lawrence School renovation, the Mullen Hall School renovation, the high school renovation, and some carryover members from one of the elementary schools that was a bridge between my predecessor and myself. So now it's in your hands. I don't have to do that anymore.
Well, again,
You got enough to do.
as a newcomer, just every time I walk into that building, I just sense the historical importance of it.
Yeah.
So you just get that sense, even as a newcomer. So it's a fantastic building.
And I was surprised to hear, but that if we built new, we wouldn't be able to have a gymnasium or an auditorium.
As a reimbursable.
As a I mean, we could do it,
Yeah.
but it would be all out of pocket for us, and we wouldn't get any state support for that. Somewhat tied to housing was the short-term rental bylaw that Member Brown, as our representative, as the chair of that committee, worked very hard over the past 2 years to come up with an acceptable bylaw. I think originally, and as Doug mentioned at the meeting the other evening, there was a thought that if you somehow restrict short-term rentals, you would increase the availability of year-round housing. And I think after they studied it for these 2 years, I think they came to the conclusion that's not necessarily so. It's not going to necessarily add to the housing stock. So they moved from restricting short-term rentals to regulating them, which is critical in where we are now as a result of the adoption of the bylaw, so that, and importantly, neighbors will have who are upset with what's going on at a short-term rental. If there's too much noise, too much parking, the trash isn't being properly disposed of, that there'll be a person that's required to be available for comment and complaint in the event of something that warrants a complaint.
And I think that's the most significant provision, well, one of the most significant, because of the complaints that I've received since I've been town manager, it's those late night loud parties oftentimes that generate the kind of quality of life complaints. The police department will come out and not have a responsible person tied to that property to contact. So having that posted and available for the police officer at the moment hopefully will address a lot of that before it gets out of control.
And the town receives a significant amount of revenue from short-term rentals, and I certainly wouldn't want to see that revenue stream impacted. If anything, I think it might increase as a result of the requirements for registering and so forth.
And tourism-based economy. I mean, they're so hugely important for us having that resource in short-term rentals because we don't have, in my opinion, a lot of hotel space. So having that, I think, in a large way supports our tourism-based economy. So yeah, we certainly didn't, in my opinion, want to do anything that would regulate out. But this addresses a lot of concerns more on the quality of life and making sure that folks that are staying in them are safe. They have operational smoke detectors and whatnot, and all of the equipment is adequate. So,
and I compliment the committee because they went in with thinking they were going to be going one way. And, because of the empirical data and anecdotal and just speaking to people, they saw the benefit of going in a completely different way, but still a way that's of great benefit to the town. So
They followed the facts.
yeah, they did. And then I guess the last item that a lot of people were very passionate about was the Articles 23 and 24, which dealt with, in Article 23 in particular, the property at 484 Brick Hill, which was the original proposed location for the police station, which, as the select board looked into and the process played out, it was felt that there was some issues with respect to Long Pond, Great Pond, Long Pond, I'm sorry, Long Pond, our main water system, and that we should get away from there. We ended up down at 100 Brick Hill. But there was still concern about, is it definite that property, that parcel, was going to be put over to conservation and never developed, and town overwhelmingly approved that, and then
removes any doubt that
removed
parcel.
any doubt, and then, Vicki Lowell and the 300 committee were behind a even more expansive petitioner's article to throw in the mix for, no development, a number of other parcels as well, and that went forward pretty.
I think an additional 14 parcels surrounding immediately adjacent to the pond.
Yeah. So our residents can rest assured that Long Pond and the purity of that water are going to be around for a long time, and thanks to the town meeting vote.
And it was interesting that this town meeting was the 40th anniversary of the 300 committee formation, coming and asking for the first purchase of land, which for the viewers that don't know, the 300 committee land trust, people say, why is it called the 300 committee? And it was established before the 300th anniversary of the town of Falmouth, and the idea was that they would preserve a conservation land of 300 acres as a gift to the town. They actually came to town meeting with 400 plus acres, and that began, and we're pushing close to 3,000. I tell them they're going to have to change their name to the 3,000 committee pretty soon. But Vicki was the first president of the 300 committee, and former Representative Turkington, Eric Turkington, he was also an initial board member and has been with them for all 40 years. So they celebrated their 40th anniversary by doing conservation land protection.
And that was an excellent tribute that Jessica Rittenauer did.
Another standing ovation for Eric and for Vicki. We have just a couple of minutes, but I just would like people to know about the stormwater discharge article that we had on.
Sure.
There were a number of particular residents that have had issues in the past, but why don't you tell the residents a little bit about the need for that change,
absolutely,
so that Public Works can do what they need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So as the DPW director mentioned the other night, it's a huge issue for us when there's water being discharged into the roadways. Peter McConnell, the DPW director, talked about two issues primarily. One is in the winter months when it freezes over and the hazards that creates. The detrimental impact that has on our road surfaces with the asphalt popping and cracking and having to be repaired. But I think more importantly, and I think he highlighted this, we have a pretty onerous stormwater management plan that we have to monitor and make sure that we're protecting our resources, the ponds, freshwater ponds in particular, from stormwater runoff. So one of the issues that I'm concerned about is these discharges from basements and whatnot, and contaminants that may be in those waters. I think the big message, Bob, I'd like to relay, and Peter did a great job at this. This is a tool. Currently, or prior to Article 20, DPW had no enforcement capability. This is just a tool. As Peter mentioned, DPW's practice has always been to work with the property owner and do everything that we can to address the root cause. But when we have to, this will give us that enforcement capability that they've been lacking in the past.
And he made it pretty clear that they don't want to use this as a hammer.
Correct.
They want to work with people to be able to get to it. But in those instances where there's just blatant disregard for for not pumping out, and people are pumping out pools and
Exactly.
you know, and taking some pumps that you know, to go out into the street, causing, you know, ice in the winter and just damage to the blacktop and the macadam, you know, on a regular basis with too much flooding. So we're kind of at the end. You know, this has been a great discussion. David, thank you for coming, and hopefully we can make this a biannual situation where you come and help us understand the intricacies of town meeting. No one better at it than you, so thanks for being here.
I always love the stories too. Thank you for sharing those.
And thank you all, and again, thanks to FCTV for giving us the opportunity to be here this evening, and stay tuned. We'll be here again in another possibly week. I don't know. We'll do one next Thursday as well. So thanks very much. Have a good evening, and thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Stay safe.
Okay.